In plague-ridden Europe, there lived a physician whose presence alone stirred unease. He walked the streets in the infamous mask of the plague doctor, glass eyes, long beak, black cloak, moving like a shadow among the dying. He kept journals of the sick, recording symptoms, treatments, and deaths with precision. But one night, he vanished. No one saw him leave. No one found his body. What remained was a letter, sealed and hidden inside his journal, not of medicine but of prophecy. Within its lines were predictions of wars that had not yet begun, rulers who had not yet fallen, and disasters that seemed centuries away. He named cities, dates, even the manner of their ruin. At first it was dismissed as madness, yet over 300 years later, one prophecy unfolded exactly as written. The world looked back horrified. How could a plague doctor, lost to history, see so far ahead? And if he foresaw one future correctly, how many more of his dark visions still wait in silence, waiting to come true? They called him the Doctor of Ashes, not because he healed with fire, but because everywhere he walked, the dead had already turned to smoke. He arrived in towns after the plague had gutted them, moving through streets where silence screamed louder than bells. The long-beaked mask he wore marked him as a figure of both dread and necessity. Mothers pulled children indoors when they saw him. Priests crossed themselves. To see the mask was to know death was already inside your walls. Yet this physician was not like the others who roamed Europe in the 17th century. Most plague doctors copied the same crude recipes for cures: vinegar, onions, bloodletting, charms of rosemary. They were more symbols than surgeons. But this man left behind something different. His journals survive in fragments, ink on parchment, bound into volumes that later collectors could not dismiss. They reveal a mind not merely recording symptoms, but dissecting the shape of catastrophe itself. He charted numbers of dead by day, mapped the spread of infection from one parish to the next, and, disturbingly, scribbled margins filled not with medical notes, but with strange predictions. He treated sickness as if it were a clockwork, and he claimed to see the gears turning forward in time. The journal begins innocently enough. He writes of blackened swellings, of fevers rising like fire inside the veins. But gradually his notes twist. "This village falls in 3 days," he writes of one settlement. The entry is dated before the death toll ever arrived. "The priest shall be the last to die," speaking scripture to a wall no one can hear. And when local records are compared, the dates match. In village after village, his predictions proved accurate, not only in the broad sweep of death, but in grotesque details. One page tells of a boy who would cry for his mother and then fall silent, lips stained purple. That boy's burial is still noted in church archives 3 days after the entry. Another passage records that a nobleman will not die of plague at all, but will hang himself from the beams of his own cellar. Later accounts confirm it. Whether by coincidence, uncanny perception, or something darker, the plague doctor saw beyond what any physician could. His writings begin to read less like a journal and more like a ledger of fate. The strangest part is that the further you read into the manuscript, the less it concerns the plague at all. The doctor begins to describe wars that had not yet begun. He notes kings whose crowns would fall, not to pestilence, but to steel. "In the north, blood shall stain the snow," one line reads, centuries before a battle fought on frozen ground. "The city of the sun shall burn," he writes, naming a year when no fire yet touched it. Time after time, historians noticed his words aligned with events that unfolded long after his disappearance. But the doctor himself left no conclusion. One night he vanished, leaving the manuscript behind, as if deliberately planted. Neighbors reported no body, no sign of flight. His beaked mask was found hanging on a door, empty. The journal was left on a desk, open to a final page written in rushed, uneven letters. "They will find me when the last of these lines comes true." Centuries later, one of those final lines would indeed come true. A war, exactly as described, broke out in the year he had written. Cities burned in the order he predicted, and so the question tightened its grip around those who studied his words. Was he a genius of terrible foresight, a madman who guessed correctly, or something more sinister, an author of fate itself? The mask and the manuscript became legend, passed between collectors, scholars, and priests who feared its pages as much as they studied them. What unsettled them most was not what had already come to pass, but what remained unreadable, sealed in cryptic Latin, waiting to be decoded. Some whispered that the prophecies were not finished, that they stretched far beyond their own lifetimes into ours. And in the margins, in faded ink, he had written one chilling phrase: "When the bird is no longer feared, the plague shall return in another form." The manuscript was not the only thing he left behind. Hidden within its pages was a folded letter, sealed with wax, bearing no name, only the mark of a bird's wing pressed into it. The parchment was thin, the ink almost burned into the fibers, as if the words themselves had weight too heavy to rest on paper. The letter was addressed to no one and everyone. It began not as a medical observation, but as a warning. I write to the living, it opened, but also to those who have not yet been born. What followed was unlike anything physicians of the time could comprehend. The letter spoke not of fevers or remedies, but of wars that stretched far beyond his century. He wrote of nations rising from dust, tearing at each other as wolves tear at flesh. He named years that did not yet exist, cities that had not yet grown, and rulers not yet born. To the scholars who first read it, the letter was madness. But centuries later, one prophecy stood out with horrifying clarity. He wrote, "In the year when iron birds darken the skies, fire shall consume cities in a single breath. A great war will not end until the shadow of ash covers the earth." For a long time, the words were dismissed as metaphor, until the 20th century arrived, until the bomb fell, until entire cities in the blink of an eye were reduced to shadows etched into walls. The iron birds were no longer metaphor. They were bombers. The shadow of ash was no longer symbolic. It was the mushroom cloud. The letter's description matched the reality of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in terrifying detail. How could a 17th century plague doctor describe weapons of war that would not exist for 300 years? How could he speak of ash that blotted out skies when his world knew only firewood and cannon smoke? Some historians argue coincidence. They claim that many prophecies can be twisted to fit later events, but those who studied the original Latin argued otherwise. The words were not vague, they were precise, almost technical. He described engines that do not tire, carrying fire across seas. He wrote of shadows burned into stone where once men stood. These were not images known to his century. They were visions of horrors yet to come. And still, the letter continued. After the prophecy of fire, he spoke of death not from plague, but from hunger. When the harvest rots in the fields, though the sun shines, when bread costs the weight of gold, the living shall envy the dead. Famine, rising costs, scarcity, all written centuries before revolutions and wars of hunger swept through Europe and beyond. But perhaps most disturbing was his final passage, scrawled in handwriting more frantic than the rest. When the birds no longer carry death, men shall carry it within themselves. A sickness born not of the earth, but of man's own hand. A pestilence without cure. For centuries, this phrase was dismissed as madness, but in modern times, its meaning has been revisited with unease. Biological weapons, engineered diseases, laboratories that tamper with life itself. The doctors seem to describe what science would dare to create. If he foresaw plague, fire, famine, and war, what of the man-made sickness? Had we yet entered that prophecy, or was it still waiting in silence? The letter of fire was locked away for centuries in the archives of collectors, many of whom would not even admit to owning it. Stories whispered that one owner burned it after reading, claiming he could not sleep, that he dreamed of shadows crawling out of the paper. Another is said to have hidden it inside a church crypt, warning his family never to touch it again. Yet somehow, copies always resurfaced. Handwritten duplicates, translations, fragments. No matter how many times the letter was suppressed, it returned. But there is one more detail, one final mystery. At the bottom of the letter, beneath the frantic handwriting, beneath the prophecies of fire and famine, was a signature. Not a name, just 3 words, inked in heavy strokes. I was called. By whom? For what purpose? No one knows. But those 3 words haunt every reader who dares look upon the letter of fire. Was the plague doctor a man touched by visions, cursed with foresight, or a vessel for something that used his hand to write across centuries? The letter terrified those who read it, but what unsettled them even more was what came next, or rather, what did not. For the doctor himself disappeared. There were no witnesses to his final night, no records of his burial, no rumors of escape. One day he was seen walking through the pest house of a dying town, and the next, nothing. His mask was found nailed to the door of a chapel. His tools of medicine, scalpels, herbs, powders, were laid neatly on a wooden table, untouched. But the man was gone, as if erased. Those who lived in that village told conflicting stories. Some swore he was taken by soldiers, accused of witchcraft for writing his unholy prophecies. Others whispered he had locked himself inside a plague house and let the disease devour him, leaving nobody behind. But a few spoke of something stranger, that on the night of his disappearance, a strange fire was seen in the sky, a streak of light that burned across the heavens and vanished above the town. To some, it was a comet. To others, an omen. To the terrified, it was a sign that the doctor had been called back to whatever force had given him his visions. But the truth may be stranger still. Centuries later, in the archives of a monastery, a letter was discovered, written not by the plague doctor, but by a monk who claimed to have spoken with him shortly before his disappearance. The monk's account is brief but haunting. He came to me in the cloister at midnight. He asked for confession, yet what he confessed was not sin, but knowledge. He said he had seen what was to come, and that it was not given to him by God, but by something else. He told me he could no longer bear it. He said he would be taken soon, and that no grave would hold him. When I pressed him, he only smiled and said, "The dead do not bury themselves." Then he left, and I never saw him again. What happened after remains speculation. Some scholars argue he fled Europe entirely, vanishing into lands where no records followed. Others believe he was executed in secret by the church, his manuscript suppressed, his name erased. Yet if that were true, how did his writings survive? Why do they appear century after century in the collections of nobles, priests, and even kings? The manuscripts themselves add to the mystery. Certain pages bear stains not of ink, but of what appears to be scorched edges, as though exposed to fire. Some lines are written in handwriting so different it seems impossible they came from the same man. Even stranger are the passages where words appear scratched out, then rewritten. Yet in the light, faint original letters can still be read beneath, forming sentences different from the ones above, as if two versions of the text exist on the same page. Historians have tried to rationalize this. Perhaps the doctor wrote in a fever, correcting himself erratically. Perhaps later copyists altered the text to fit unfolding history. But none of these explanations account for the predictions that still remain accurate, untouched by revision. The burning of cities, the fall of kings, the rise of iron machines, the silence of dead harvests, and, most unsettling, the sickness born not of the earth, but of man's hand. The vanishing of the doctor became as legendary as his writings. In rural Europe, stories spread of a ghostly figure in a plague mask appearing in towns on the eve of disaster. In one tale, he was seen walking the streets of London just before the Great Fire. In another, he appeared in the trenches of the First World War, silent, standing among the dying. Soldiers swore they saw a dark figure in the distance, watching, unmoving, vanishing when approached. Were these only echoes of fear, stories told to give shape to chaos? Or was it possible the plague doctor had become something more than a man? The disappearance also left behind one more riddle. Inside the manuscript, on a page near the end, is a passage that has defied translation. Written in a cipher that no scholar has fully cracked, the fragment reads only partially. "I will be absent until the time returns. When the bird is worn not for death, but for jest, then I will return for the final vision." The chilling part? Today, plague masks are no longer feared symbols of death. They are sold as costumes, worn at festivals, turned into jokes on stages and in carnivals. The bird has indeed become jest. And so the question lingers. Was this his warning? That when his mask was no longer a terror, he himself, or what he became, would return? If he vanished into death, then his prophecies should have ended with him. Yet they did not. The words kept surfacing, creeping forward into centuries he could never have lived to see. The plague doctor, erased from flesh, seemed to live on in ink. And if his disappearance was not an ending, but a transformation, then we are forced to ask, what exactly disappeared that night? A man of flesh? Or something wearing his shape, something that stepped into our world only long enough to write and then withdrew, waiting until the last line of his manuscript came true? The vanishing was not merely an absence. It was a beginning of silence, a silence that echoed louder with every fulfilled prophecy, a silence that might not remain forever. For centuries, the doctor's writings circulated in fragments, passed like contraband between collectors, scholars, and priests who never dared to admit what they held. Some burned the pages after reading them. Others locked them away in monasteries, libraries, or private vaults. Yet somehow pieces always survived, and each time a great disaster struck, someone would inevitably draw the connection back to him. The plague doctor who vanished, yet seemed to write history before it happened. But not all his work has been revealed. Hidden among his manuscripts are sections written in code, strange combinations of Latin, Greek, and invented symbols no one has fully deciphered. Cryptographers from monks in the 17th century to modern-day analysts have tried to break it. Most gave up, convinced the doctor's mind had simply fractured. Yet those who pressed further reported something disturbing. The code was not random, it shifted over time, almost as if the text rewrote itself when copied, making each generation of manuscripts slightly different, as if the words themselves were alive. One of the most infamous passages, when pieced together, speaks of a pestilence that moves faster than horses, swifter than birds. Scholars of the 19th century laughed at such nonsense. But to modern eyes, it reads like an uncanny description of viruses traveling by planes, diseases that can leap continents in hours, carried by engines of speed unknown in his time. Another passage describes the shadow that walks with every man, unseen, taking breath but giving none. Many believe this to be a prophecy of pollution or choking smog, written centuries before the Industrial Revolution ever began. Yet the darkest fragment is the one that remains incomplete. The cipher breaks down halfway, leaving only a sentence that bleeds into nothing. When men no longer die from what they see, but from what they cannot, and then it ends. Scholars have fought for centuries over how that sentence might finish. Some suggest it refers to invisible illnesses, viruses, radiation, toxins. Others whisper of ideas, of lies, of unseen forces more dangerous than any plague. The forbidden pages terrify not because of what they reveal, but because of what they withhold. They suggest that the doctor's knowledge did not end with famine or war, but reached into futures still unfolding. Some argue the text should be locked away forever. Others insist they hold warnings humanity cannot afford to ignore. Yet a more unsettling question lingers. If the doctor truly saw our present, then what else did he see? Did his final ciphered lines already describe events that lie ahead of us? And if so, have we already stepped into his last prophecy without even knowing it? The plague doctor's manuscripts were meant to be relics of the past, but the problem is they keep proving themselves in the present. In the early 20th century, a researcher uncovered one line that seemed absurd. When men breathe smoke to reach the sky, then death will fall not from heaven, but from their own hands. At the time, the words made little sense. But decades later, as factories poured smoke into the air and cities filled with choking fumes, the meaning seemed obvious. And when planes began to rain bombs on cities, the prophecy's second half became chillingly clear. Another fragment reads, "The world shall shrink until no border holds back the plague." Centuries before globalization, before travel by rail or air, the doctor had written of something eerily close to our reality. When modern pandemics swept across nations in weeks, his words once again seemed less like metaphor and more like foresight. But perhaps the most unsettling echo is one still being debated today. In one passage, he wrote, "They will speak with voices not their own. They will be heard though no mouth opens." At the time, it sounded like madness. Today, it reads like an uncanny vision of radio, of recordings, of voices captured and replayed by machines. And in our own time, some claim it even resembles the rise of artificial voices, technology that can mimic speech, even the dead, allowing echoes of the past to speak in the present. Each generation has found in his words a mirror. Yet what is most disturbing is not what has already matched our history, but what still remains unread. Many pages in his manuscripts are missing, torn out, hidden, or rumored destroyed, but copies resurface. And with each resurfacing comes another connection to events unfolding in the world around us. Skeptics argue that prophecy is only retrofitting, shaping vague words to fit events after they happen. But those who have seen the original letters insist the detail is too sharp, too specific. Not vague fortune-telling, but exact. Names, years, cities. And this precision forces an unbearable thought. If he was right about the past, if he was right about our present, then is he also right about what comes next? And what if his disappearance was not the end of his story? What if it was part of the prophecy itself? Because scattered across his final notes, almost like whispers hidden between the lines, there appears a phrase that repeats again and again. "I will return when the last page is read." The story began with a man in a mask, walking through plague-ridden streets, writing in his journal as death gathered around him. He was just one among many physicians of his age, yet he became something else entirely. His disappearance, his manuscript, his letter, his forbidden pages, all point to a truth more terrifying than the plague itself. Because the disease he treated has long since faded into history, but his words remain. And those words have proven more enduring, more infectious than any sickness. Every century finds itself staring into his prophecies. Wars, famine, fire, pestilence. He spoke of them all, and each time the world laughed, then shuddered, as his visions came alive in reality. And still there are pages left unread. Still there are lines whose meanings have not yet been revealed. What if the plague doctor's writings are not merely the ramblings of a fevered mind? What if they are a ledger, not of the past, but of everything still to come? What if the doctor did not vanish at all, but was taken, removed, until the moment when his final prophecy would demand his return? The chilling words scrawled across the manuscript echo even now. "I will return when the last page is read." And so we are left with a question. What if the last page has not yet been turned? What if the final prophecy is not about fire or famine or even disease, but something greater, something still hidden, waiting to reveal itself. Centuries ago, his mask struck terror into all who saw it. Today it is worn at masquerades, on stages, in jest. But the doctor warned, when the bird is no longer feared, the plague shall return in another form. That time is now. The mask that once meant death is now a costume. The words that once seemed madness are now history. And the man who should have been forgotten still whispers across centuries. Perhaps he is gone. Perhaps he never was. Or perhaps he waits, at the edge of time, at the turning of the last page, ready to step back into the world he described so faithfully. And if he does return, then the question is not whether we will recognize him. The question is whether we will realize too late that he had always been here, watching, writing, waiting.